West Virginia, and he's on our independent line.
Good morning. I think you've done a really great job of assessing the situation over there. Appreciate all the talking you've done this morning on it. Two things that I haven't heard much of. Has anybody considered the wag the dog that we heard so much about when Bill Clinton was in there? Nobody's talking about Benghazi, the IRS, the NSA. That's all a thing of the past now. But my main question is, there's a term that I haven't heard used much in this case, and I'm worried about it. It's mission creep. When John Kerry talked about yesterday, maybe boots on the ground in case we had to guard stockpiles of weapons, and then he backtracked on it, I'm afraid the people that are thinking we can really limit this and go in and just get that done and be out are not recognizing the danger of making more moves, and finally we're in a big mess over there. I'd like to listen to your comments.
Well, thank you for your comment up front, and two very good questions. There have been some accusations that there's a wag the dog exercise going on, that the president has suddenly become seized of the challenge of Syria because, in fact, he wants to distract from whether it's Benghazi or the IRS. We have some polling experts at the American Enterprise Institute. Carlin Bowman is our expert on American public opinion. I would say that perhaps the caller could be right, although I don't think he is, but I think it would be a possibility if, in fact, the American people actually cared about these scandals. Shocking as it is to me living in Washington, I'm utterly horrified about how the Benghazi investigation has been prosecuted, utterly horrified about the IRS spying on, stopping, and hurting non-governmental organizations. The American public is not excited about these issues. I think your listeners are. I think probably we're very interested in these questions, but the American public isn't as excited about all of this as I would have thought, and a lot of polling shows that to be fairly consistent. So I don't actually think the president needs to distract people from these things. The problem really is that the president isn't doing anything about any of these problems. He's not doing anything about the IRS. He's not doing anything about Benghazi. He's doing something half-assed about Syria. And the Republicans in the Congress aren't, frankly, doing a terribly good job of holding the president's feet to the fire on any of these issues. And that's another challenge. I think all of the political parties are really letting people down. On the question of mission creep, we talked a little bit about that, and I actually mentioned that specific quote from Senator Kerry, Secretary Kerry. I'm used to him as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. And I think that there's every reason to suspect that there could be mission creep because we haven't gotten any context. So the administration keeps saying, no, it's not going to, there's not going to be mission creep, it's not going to happen, it's not going to change, nothing's going to happen. Trust us. But again, without all that context, without that narrative from the president, people are going to suspect. Get out there, Mr. Obama. Tell the American people what you're thinking.
A couple of Yale professors offer an op-ed this morning taking a look at the United Nations question when it comes to Syria. The headline is on Syria, a UN vote isn't optional. They argue this question ignores the obvious. If the United States begins an attack without Security Council authorization, it would flout the most fundamental international rule of all, the prohibition on the use of military force for anything but self-defense in the absence of Security Council approval. They go on to say, others say it is legalistic, even naive, to rely on the UN Charter, which has been breached countless times. But what is one more, especially when the alternative is the slaughter of innocents? But in all these breaches add up, and each one makes it harder to hold others to the rules. If we follow Kosovo and Iraq with Syria, it will be difficult, if not impossible, to stop others from similar use of force down the line.
Well, my late boss used to say, I think we're going to have to agree to disagree. I'm a big believer in the Constitution of the United States and not the United Nations Charter. I think it's the Constitution that governs what the president does in this country, not the United Nations Charter. And I don't think that the American people believe when they vote that the United Nations should be an arbiter of what is in our national interest and what isn't. As to the question of too many precedents, well, first of all, Iraq was legal because we had an authorization from the Security Council to use whatever means necessary to enforce what the weapons inspectors were doing. So, again, I would assert an unnecessary technicality. I think what the president needs to do is to persuade the American Congress and the American people he can forget about the United Nations, because in effect, every time you go to the UN, you're just giving a veto to the Russians and the Chinese.
Here is Kyle from Vermont on our independent line. Hi.
Hi. So I just want to touch on the Americans being war weary. When we chased Iraq down, we saw a lot of our family members come back, friends and family members come back in coffins with American flags draped over them. Americans became very weary when we were chasing around weapons of mass destruction, and we found that they didn't particularly exist. It's hard to go into another country and solve their problems when we see our families coming back for seemingly unjust causes. Thank you for the discussion.
A question of unjust causes is, I think, a matter of opinion. I spend a lot of time talking to our forces, and I don't think that there's any battle in America to see who's more sorry about our military that give the ultimate sacrifice in war, and the cost that exacts on families. That being said, it is those soldiers and their families. The notion that Americans are war weary because we're really tired of seeing those coffins with flags on them is a little bit callous, and I think it's important to look to what the military say about their efforts. Soldiers I talk to are enormously proud of the work that they've done in fighting terrorism and in helping our country be safer.
One more call from Scott from West Virginia, Republican line.
Yeah, hello?
You're on. Go ahead.
Okay, I was wondering, if he created a war crime by using chemical weapons, why can we not arrest him, give him his day in court, and whether he's guilty or innocent, give him his trial? Can we do that? Is that a possibility?
Well, there are conventions against the use of chemical weapons, and in addition, there are charges of crimes against humanity. A case can be brought in the International Criminal Court. There are two sides to that question for the caller, and it's another 45 minutes of conversation. But part of the problem is when you indict somebody, it makes it much less likely that they're going to come to a negotiated settlement. That being said, I don't think Assad is coming to a negotiated settlement. My view is indict him, try him. On the other hand, who's going to pick him up? Who's going to deliver him? That question hasn't yet been answered. And what we see in other cases where there have been crimes against humanity and we've gone to the International Criminal Court or to other courts that have been set up is it's actually a mighty tall order to get these folks into the dock. It was only once we really were able to win in the Balkans that we were able to do that. And even that is a very, very complex and difficult process.
Daniel Pletka, the Foreign and Defense Studies Vice President for American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for joining us.
It's always a pleasure.
Coming up on our program, we'll hear from Christine Owens. She's with the National Employment Law Project. We'll talk about the wages of the American worker and the fight to raise the minimum wage. And later on in the program, Nina Easton of Fortune magazine, her cover story about an American CEO who uncovered widespread hacking